Hello, and welcome to the Your Food Matters podcast. I'm here with my great friend and colleague, Erik Bustillo.
Hello, hello, everybody.
Hey, Erik. So, today, if you're watching us on YouTube, Erik can't see me. He's flying blind.
So no funny faces. Don't make any funny
Nope.
faces at me.
So,
Uh,
we're so glad that you've joined us today. We are on all the podcast platforms and, as you heard, on YouTube through the Move Nutrition Network. And if you enjoy our podcast, please tell your friends, share our links, and let us know what you're thinking. We'd love to hear from you. Well, today's topic is one that, I think lately we're just starting to get asked a lot of questions. More, I think, now that we're doing this podcast. This one I get asked everywhere I go, whether I'm at the farmer's market, at the gym, at a holiday party, and I'm talking to my cousin. I get asked about intermittent fasting. What about you, Erik?
Left and right, pretty much every seminar and workshop that I do, there's going to be at least one question about intermittent fasting. And we're talking about all sorts of individuals, from men, women, athletes, non-exercisers, avid exercisers, military individuals, tactical athletes. I mean, so many people are curious about fasting, and it's quite interesting to see how much popularity it has gained over the last several years or so. And I think there are varying reasons for its popularity, but it's definitely become quite the trend.
It is, and I hear it recommended by physicians for trying people trying to get their blood sugar under control, as well as maybe as a remedy for sleep issues, and of course trying to lose a little body fat. So I really want to get into the details of it today. What are the advantages? Um, does it make a difference? Is it a good strategy? And then are there any reasons not to do it? I just think that it's hard for people to just get into the meat of the science because it really fasting has kind of like become polarized like politics, um and I think you and we are much more practical. We like to see people find success, and so it's kind of like, you know what, if it works for you and it doesn't harm you, even if the science is equivocal, let's try it. So let's talk about like what do we know, sort of start with what the heck is intermittent fasting.
Yeah, so fasting is something that we know has been around for forever. People have done it in some way, shape, or form. There's different practices of religion that incorporate fasting, um, and that's been happening for years, and just from their religious customs and culture. Uh, the in air quotes, the New Age way of fasting, at least the most popular one, has become that 16-8 method, right? Where for 16 hours out of the 24 hours, an individual is fasting, and most times that does include sleep. And then the 8 remaining hours in the day is that individual's feeding or eating window. So whatever they're going to eat, they eat it within that 8 hour time frame. Now, there are different ways or forms of fasting. Some people might do full 24 or 48-hour fasts. Some people might do a little bit less time. They might do 14 and 10 instead of 16 and 8. Other people might even do 18 and 6. So there's different ways where people kind of find their own method to the madness, if you will. But the most common one is going to be 16-hour fast and 8 hour time frame to have your calories for the day in that 8 hour window.
Right. So, like, you may wake up in the morning and the first time you eat, maybe 10 o'clock a.m. And then you eat until 6 o'clock p.m. and you're done. And the rest of the time you're fasting. The fasting is not liquids. So it's non-caloric, so you certainly are hydrating. No reason not to be drinking fluids, but not taking any calories in during that time, right?
Yeah, and also, just to make sure that everyone is clear on this too, if someone is following that 16:8 time frame, then it doesn't necessarily mean that they're literally eating for 8 hours
Right,
straight.
right.
It's just you, so I mean, if you want to, I guess you can by all means, sure, but it doesn't sound very productive. But
Right.
you
Practice being
can
the hot
eat
dog
in the 8 hour
champion.
window. Exactly, right? Just hot dog, hot dog, hot dog. Uh, so, maybe, you eat and then in a couple of hours you eat again and so on and so forth. So just wanted to kind of make that kind of clear. But
Right.
and I like that you said the caloric part of it too, because people will do things like water fasts where they might not eat or consume calories for X number of hours, in some cases X number of days, but they will drink. So there's just so many different ways around it.
Yeah. Yeah, and there's, like you said, religious reasons, and I think one of the areas that allowed for great research on this, even though it's not a complete fast, is Ramadan. So, for a month, going, around, I think it's around 14 hours without food, 12 to 14 hours, and then eating in the evening. Uh, and then fasting again, and it doesn't include liquids. You can drink, and to reinforce that, some people call intermittent fasting sort of eating 3 days a week and fasting the in between days. There's all kinds of intermittent fasting, but let's get to what the science says, and what we know. And what's very interesting to me is that, as someone who goes right into the literature myself, really the mother lode of the research is on fat rats. So we certainly have human studies, and we're going to talk about that. But the origins of a lot of the commentaries and the sort of, oh, this is going to be great, and it's going to enhance weight loss, and it's going to do all of these things for you, literally was research on fat rats. So make sure that if you're looking up the research on this, that you're finding human studies. And then there are studies that really are not great studies. Sometimes they weren't purposefully done poorly, but maybe they don't have enough subjects to get significance to their data. So there's really, as a body of evidence, it's quite mixed, with some really good studies in there.
Yeah, and I think that we see this happen often where scientific data gets reported, and we know the data are the data. Um, but a lot of times we forget to look at the little nuances, like what what was the study done on? Was it done on humans? Was it done on mice? And so on and so forth. Um, and that's where we have to be mindful of these things because people can kind of take it and run with it. So we most certainly want to see what the human data show. Um, and I think there's a couple of things to discuss when it comes to fasting. Obviously, what the data show, but then of course the practical or not very practical side of something like fasting. Um, I mean, from some of the human studies, um, what Sue, I guess what do you think is, if anything, maybe the most fascinating or interesting thing that you've found about fasting and what studies kind of show about that?
Well, especially with this sort of, 12 hours on, 12 hours off, or 14 hours on, 10 hours off, or, that kind of daily intermittent fasting, where we have, um, long periods of the day and evening overnight fast, where we're not eating. So you stop eating fairly early in the evening, let's say, for most people, somewhere between maybe 4 o'clock and 7 o'clock in the evening, and you don't eat again until perhaps 7 a.m. to 10 a.m. or something like that the next day. Um, I think that data, um, when we're looking at metabolic syndrome, people who have uncontrolled uh, blood sugar levels, their carbohydrate metabolism is somewhat disturbed. That's where we really, I think, begin to see that it might be a helpful strategy. Whether it's the fact that they're just not pushing food into their body and their body gets to kind of repair, and get a grip without constantly having to manage the carbohydrate input, or the fact that they end up, which is what we see in so many of these studies when we look at weight loss, it's just that you're eating fewer calories, um, because you have a set amount of time to eat, and that evening snacking just goes away. That is really interesting, I think, for people trying to get control of their carbohydrate metabolism. That's interesting. So meaning that you have insulin uh, problems, and you have insulin insensitivity. Um, the the flip side of that, well, let me go back and say, with clients that I have worked with who have sleep issues, just anecdotally, I have found that getting people to stop eating really late, unless they really need those calories, unless it's, a big athlete that needs 10,000 calories a day, and that's the only way they're going to get it in. um, the learning to not snack late at night has been kind of a good habit to break, and to end their eating, so that they're not having any, gastrointestinal reflux issues, that their body is quieting down and can focus on rest and sleep. And then the last part is, what about weight loss, which is what most people care about? And really, the data are quite abundantly clear. There's nothing magical that you're fasting. The magic is that you're actually eating less, because when we pit people one to one eating the identical number of calories, or calorie deficit, for their bodies, if they eat all day long the same number of calories that the people eat who fast, intermittent fast, but still get in all that same number of calories, let's say in 6 or 8 hours during the day, the weight loss is identical. There's nothing different. So it's really a calorie issue. However, it creates a black and white day, right? I eat now, I don't eat at this time. And so my decision making of, well, could I have that snack, how much did I really eat during the day, maybe I can have a little bit, oh, I'm going to go out, I'm just going to, have a drink or two, it still fits in my plan, but maybe it really doesn't, all of that sort of fall off your plan stuff, it you get much more control around it. And I think it, for many people, that's it's the control around their eating and those habits that is a good strategy and successful strategy for them.
Yeah, it definitely helps people with having a little bit of structure, with how they're eating, when they're eating, and in some cases with what they're eating. Um, because we have seen studies that show improvement in triglycerides in
Right.
fasting groups. Um, at the same time, we'll see those improvements in individuals who eat in a caloric deficit, right? So now and these individuals maybe weren't the most cardiometabolically healthy and whatnot, but we'll see these improvements But just like you said, it comes down to that caloric aspect of it. Um, and I find it quite fascinating to just how something can kind of pick up steam and continue going forward. I have had many people ask me about fasting, and I remember this one particular time I was working with someone, and they knew someone who had done intermittent fasting, and they had successfully lost weight by incorporating this fasting strategy.
Hmm.
So they wanted to work with me and they wanted to try to do fasting. So I said, hey, let's go ahead and do it. I'm not particularly, I guess, dogmatic in my approach. So I want to help an individual in whatever is going to be the best way that may help them. And this individual was curious and excited to try fasting. I'll keep a long story short. He didn't lose any weight. He either maintained or potentially even gained weight. And this person is someone who they would just consume a large amount of calories in their 8 hour
Right.
fasting, in their 8 hour feeding window. Um, because there is no magic to it. For some people, can it be great? Absolutely. For other people, I mean, not so much. So if we just can't sit here and think that because it's fasting and because it has worked for somebody else in the world of losing weight, we can't sit and think that it's going to automatically apply to everyone, or to even think that because they are fasting, that's the reason that they're particularly losing weight. Ultimately, it does come down to the whole calories coming in versus calories going out component of weight loss. So there's nothing magical about it, but it can be helpful, right? I don't want people to think like, oh man, this is pointless. Why on earth am I going to fast? It can work really well for some people, and there's always that nuance.
Right. Well, and it really still matters, like you said, your food choices. If you're during that 6 or 8 hours of eating, you're stuffing your face with Oreos and chocolate chip cookies and gummy bears, that is not a healthy plan. Number one, neither is it a strategy for weight loss. So, so still, you still need to apply the principles of healthy eating, right? Avoiding highly processed, refined foods, refined sugars, refined starches, and focus on whole foods, plant-rich diet, lower fats, eating whole grains, beans, fruits, vegetables, nuts, and seeds, healthy lean protein, and healthy fats. So that's still, kind of the watchword of any health program. Um, there there's a real need to stay active, physically, for, again, whole body health, and mind and body health. And if you're fasting all day, like if you're one of these people that are 24 hours on, 24 hours off, your fast day, may be less active. And so being aware that that may happen, you may find that you actually can't exercise at all on your fasting day, although most people, to be honest, do adjust to it and then usually eat in the evening. It's not typically, the people that I know who've done it eat in the evening. They fast all day and then eat in the evening. Um Hard to get in all the nutrition that you actually need to be a healthy person when you're doing that, and that means that you really should be paying attention to the quality of the foods that you're eating and the amount. um and then the last part is this nighttime snacking. So I had one person say, well, I actually want to eat from 4 o'clock in the afternoon until midnight and then go to sleep. So, there is, as I said, an issue with eating right before bed. And typically it is disruption of your sleep. And when you don't sleep well, we know that that does not enhance muscle protein synthesis, building muscle, and it doesn't enhance fat burning either. And so, so being a healthy person, one of the primary things is sleep. And so that's odd. The only time that is something that I do work with are shift workers. And that's where sort of intermittent fasting may be a strategy that they employ so that they know that they are working a midnight shift. And so we're trying to figure out when they eat, when they don't, how it shifts sometimes week to week, and those can be hard. And so giving people the freedom to feel like I don't have to be eating all the time, which has been kind of a message out there, don't you think? Sort of, you need to have 3 meals and 3 snacks, and you need to be eating every 2 to 3 hours, and yada yada yada. That comes out of a very different world than the general population and the activity levels of the general population.
Most definitely. That the messaging behind having to eat every couple hours or every few hours, uh initially that kind of started up with people thinking like, hey, by eating, I mean, you have to metabolize the food that you're eating, so it's going to boost your metabolism just by eating alone. Now your body becomes a furnace and all those fun marketing words. Um, but
It sure built the snack food
there's
industry.
that's for sure. And I will say this personally, I like the method of eating every 2 to 3 hours because it works for me. I mean, I'm trying to eat somewhere at or just above 3,000 calories on a pretty regular basis, and for me, I'd rather have my meals kind of split up throughout the day and that sort of thing. But when it comes to something like fasting, and this is where we always have to approach things with caution because people will automatically jump on something and say, yeah, fasting is great. I can eat from 4 to 12 and then go to sleep, 4 p.m. until midnight, and then go to sleep. Well, we certainly want our body to be able to rest. We don't want it to rest and digest, even though technically digestion takes anywhere between 18 and maybe 30 hours to fully digest something. Um, but the idea of just eating something and letting it kind of get into the stomach and just kind of sit there and the slower motility and all of that, um, that can truly interrupt the quality of sleep. And then, Sue, like you said, how can we truly be as healthy as we possibly can be if our sleep is negatively affected? And now it's getting negatively affected by something else that we need, which is our nutrition. So
Right.
we have to be mindful of those things. Uh, and I do think that there's something to be said about fasting and certain individuals that might benefit from it, because there are those people who will fast and they do it not necessarily because they wanted to initially, but maybe their morning routine or morning schedule just kind of pushed them into that direction,
Hmm.
and they find something that just works well for them. Um, I've also had some individuals, military individuals, that have incorporated fasting, and it works well for their particular schedule and those sorts of things. Especially when I work with the military groups, I like to let them know, like, hey, if you're, because I firmly believe that we can train ourselves to do just about anything. So if you know that you're in air quotes, right, quote unquote, at risk of having to fast, and let's say someone is maybe being deployed or something along those lines,
Right, right.
well, it's better that we practice that, right? That we get ourselves trained for it while we're here, right? I say stateside,
Hmm.
before anyone has to get deployed, because now not only can they prove to themselves that they can do it, but the body will acclimate a little bit faster from my experience to having to go into that fasted state. Um, and of course, there are people who also experience certain cognitive enhancements or improvements. They feel like they can just focus a little bit better if they're in a fasted state. In some cases, they might even feel like they have better energy levels. Um, and I always find that to be very interesting and quite fascinating, where their mental acuity seems to improve a bit. Um, Part of it may have to do with the fact that they were not eating very well before, so it was not very good quality before. Um, but I can't help but think, hey, maybe there is something there to fasting that can truly help with that mental and from a scientific standpoint, I'm not 100% sure what it is, but I'd be curious to see what studies continue to show in that regard to help with that mental and cognitive standpoint of things.
Well, it certainly has been something that spiritually people have sought, for thousands of years. So, I if nothing else, it frees your mind from thinking about having to feed yourself, right? So you have all
Yep.
that extra space and time to think about other things. I have found in talking to the public, speaking when I do speaking engagements, that people who have really successfully lost quite a bit of weight and were very overweight or obese before starting to fast is that it was the first time that they began to understand what feeling hungry was. and and so they, because we know that those appetite hormones get confused with obesity, and that's the success of these, right, new weight loss drugs. um, they begin to understand what is actual hunger. They start to think about and focus in on, when am I satisfied again. And it gives them the space to understand, okay, I've planned out my nutrition and my meals for the day. I know that I've met my needs. Why am I still feeling hungry? And now they're outside their eating time, and they get to think introspectively about, what am I actually feeling? If I'm sensing hunger, but I shouldn't be because I've met my actual nutritional needs, what else is happening? Am I bored? Is it a coping mechanism? Is it deflection from feeling other emotions that I don't want to feel? It gives them that space to recognize both what is real hunger, and then why am I feeling hungry when I do have a good, healthy nutrition program during those hours that I'm allowed to eat or that I've programmed in eating. So, yes, I think there are some, like we said at the very beginning, some really practical reasons that this may work successfully for people, but it isn't required and it's not for everyone. And one client that I had that came to me who had tried intermittent fasting very unsuccessfully because she had to stop exercising because she wasn't fueling herself before she went to exercise, was
That's rough.
this woman, right? And so she was on a 10 a.m. to 6 p.m. 8-hour plan. That's what her trainer put her on. And yet her workout time was 7 o'clock in the morning, which meant she would go and train fasting. And while you can do that, you typically can't do high intensity exercise like that. Number one, you need carbohydrate available immediately. And typically, your blood sugar levels are slightly reduced or lower when you wake up in the morning. And so she couldn't do high intensity exercise. She couldn't do the training that she enjoyed because she felt like she was going to pass out. so that wasn't working for her.
Yep.
And so, just be aware that there's not something wrong with you if intermittent fasting is not your bag.
Yeah, and that especially is important to mention with what populations probably shouldn't fast, right? So specifically, similar to your client, talking about women or females in particular, there's been some interesting information and recommendations from some researchers and whatnot, where they're saying that women in particular should not perform training in particular, so resistance training and those things, in a fasted state.
Right.
Um, Now, that will potentially impact their body composition goals or just their performance, maybe even the recovery. Uh, but I find it quite fascinating for research to just kind of show that, yeah, maybe women shouldn't be doing that. And I think you made a great point. If you're doing some form of high intensity training, that involves resistance training, involves weights, maybe it involves other things like plyometrics, sprinting, or those sorts of training modalities. We need that fuel to help us function. Now, can you pull it off? I mean, I'd venture to say most people can potentially pull it off, but is it optimal? Now that's another question.
Mhm.
Um, so if we're doing intense exercise, maybe fasting wouldn't be the best way to go. Also, individuals with diabetes, particularly insulin dependent individuals with diabetes, they should be mindful of what they have eaten or not eaten, especially before training and whatnot. And in some cases, this one I find it rather interesting, is individuals who have some sort of gastrointestinal issues, particularly something like IBS,
Mhm.
irritable bowel syndrome. Um, and everyone is not the same. In some cases, fasting helps these individuals feel a little bit better. In other cases, fasting may exacerbate the situation. Um, and that's where we always go back to individuality. We have to keep in mind that not everyone is going to respond the same. Everyone's situation is different. Um, and those are some of like the main populations that come to mind for me when I think about fasting, and maybe people who shouldn't particularly do it or practice it.
Right, and including when you say women, if you're pregnant, if you're lactating, yeah, not a good. You should not be fasting. Um, and so, and when we talk about, sort of the elite athletes or anyone who's got physical goals, performance goals, when I talk about put your food to work for you, that's a serious way that you put your food to work for you, and you never underfuel training, because if you underfuel training and you have physical performance goals, you're not going to optimize your training and you're not going to reach the goals in the way that you can. So like Erik said, you may be able to train, but you're going to fatigue before you finish your workout. You will not be able to push out the walls of performance all the way to the end of that training session, and that's when you get the benefit of the training session, is really kind of toward the end. That's when you maximize your time in the gym. And so just kind of on that note, I want uh, to kind of wrap it up. We've had, I think, a really great chat. I hope it's answered most of the questions that everyone has had. And just remember, your food matters. Put your food to work for you and let yourself maximize your performance in any way, shape, or form. And so if intermittent fasting is something you're interested in, you can certainly go to the Journal of the International Society of Sport Nutrition online. All of the articles are free to access. You can download them and you can do some search on your own and read studies that have been published, at least in that journal. There have been many studies published, but as Erik said, make sure you're looking at human studies.
Ideally, right?
Well, it's been a great talk, Erik. Good to see you. Even though you can't see me, I haven't made any faces since the
Boo.
beginning. All
Yeah.
right.
Thank you, Sue. I appreciate it.
Appreciate you, Erik. Enjoy Washington, D.C. I guess that's where you are. And say hello to the Capitol for us. And we'll see you soon.
Thank you. Thanks, everybody.